Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, and community organizing socialist Kenny Cepeda. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. Please jot down our information. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. Thank you. We are joined today by socialist and teacher and contributor to Counterpunch and writer and organizer in the Teachers Union at UESF with Andy Lipson. And I'm so very happy that AJ is here.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Let's see. As we were before recording, we were trying to figure out what we're going to be discussing today. And it seems as if we went from vaccines to maybe the reopening of schools to organizing, or the stress in organizing efforts that we're having in trying to organize away from distance learning. Who knows what we'll be discussing. So as I said earlier before we started recording, this will be a rant video of sorts of many things today.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as last week, I can't remember when, we were getting wind of the fact that an agreement had been reached between UESF and San Francisco Unified School District about the reopening schools. And, it was confusing. It still is confusing about what all the information that's out there and what's going on. Obviously, the framework of everything is around safety and is around COVID and around PPEs. It's around vaccinations. It's around contact tracing. And also another word that comes up is hybrid schools. And also just to know that the reopening of schools, as it's talking about right now, does not involve all 56,000 students and all 6,000 educators. Currently, it's talking about students with learning disabilities, early childhood development, like some of the more fragile students who are really struggling with this, like homeless students, and then also K through 5 is really what's being discussed, and it's a phased approach. So that's what's on discussion, and it's supposedly a discussion about reopening schools. And I just found myself really just struggling this week, honestly, to know what to say and know what to do at what's taking place right now. There's a lot of things I don't like about what's happening. There's not much that I do like. Probably the only thing I do like about any of this, if I could say I like it, is that they're not at this point. They're not talking about forcing people to get vaccinated. So I think that's probably the only thing. But mostly what I was hoping, and the reason I contacted AJ, is just to sit here and talk about how I feel about this process, how I feel about what's happening, what do I think it means. And most of the time before an episode, I try to really have my ducks lined up, at least, to know what I actually think about some of this stuff. And I'm not doing that in this episode today. I have some thoughts, but for the most part, it's been very demoralizing to go through this, where it's like, I think the first thing that comes to mind is all these words we hear about safety feel like danger to me, right? Every time they talk about safety, it feels like danger, like safety, 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 but it feels like danger, like all the things that are coming at us and the way society is being reconstructed does not feel safe at all, in the name of safety, though. And now this process called reopening schools doesn't feel like a reopening. And maybe that's the thing I'm trying to struggle with, which is it feels like a funeral for what the schools that were there before. And so maybe that's the first thought I'll have is, and I'm just trying to figure out why I feel so upset about it in some ways. I think we'll share some details of things, but that's my starting point. Is I was hoping to use this episode to have AJ here and Eduardo and Kenny. And Eduardo, you and I have actually been talking a lot about the reopening schools, and AJ, you and I have been working with the group that Eduardo is now kind of working with. So I'm glad to be here talking with y'all. I just don't really know what's going to come up during the episode.
I don't know where to begin, I guess, except for to say that I have felt this week, kind of just waiting, not so much waiting for the shoe to drop, but just a feeling of like this. There was a moment, like a very small moment, where it seemed like we were discussing whether or not schools should reopen, like we in the city, I don't know, families, educators, like there was, and it wasn't even most people, but it just for a moment felt like there was a little crack in space. And I sort of feel like now, with an agreement being pushed very quickly through conversation and voting in our union, and the media shifting to a schools are now reopening, here's the plan kind of conversation, that I'm just expecting that tiny little sliver of light that I felt like was there to shut very quickly, to go out, and I don't think that I've necessarily seen, I don't think that will necessarily happen for the next, I don't know when it'll happen, but that's sort of, I'm anticipating feeling kind of that sense of very deep isolation that I felt kind of back in the fall, kind of like, October, November, before I really had sort of found a couple other people who wanted to really talk about maybe what we could do. So yeah, I'll just start there with a sense of dread. I can say a few more things specifically if that would be useful about kind of what I've been thinking about this week. Because I've gone to a couple of different union meetings and even suffered through a very long board meeting in this past week to kind of just figure out like what's the newspaper saying, what's the school board saying, what's my union saying, and trying to sort of sort through all of it and find some kind of understanding about what might really be going on. And I mean, I think there's a million things I could say, but I'm not excited about this plan for schools supposedly reopening, which they aren't really. I don't support the agreement as it exists. I won't be voting for it. And I've, for what it's worth, put out a message to my staff today, the folks that I work with, and said, like, I'm not voting for it. Here's some reasons why. The safety agreement, I mean, aside from the fact that there's just, the safety agreement doesn't even speak to any of my concerns about why not being, like, about safety and what it would mean to be safe and together and feel safe right now. Like all of that aside, like I'm not for voting for a plan that's about reopening, that's not for everyone, that's not even reopening all schools, that's not opening for all grades, and that is opening with some really, really what's going to be extremely difficult working conditions for the teachers who are actually being asked to go back.
Yeah, well, I've been, from the start, have been in support of reopening schools, especially because of all the things that we have discussed in these previous episodes of What's Left. But it wasn't until, what was it, late January, early February, that I really got sucked in by you all to get to really involve myself. I've also been in this 3-hour board meeting yesterday. I think it was, where I just wanted to listen to what students had to say about the reopening of schools. Also, there was another thing about one of my former colleagues also had a non-reelect, and I wanted to be there and support and also speak with other former colleagues. Anyhow, and the thing is, I feel very overwhelmed, but I also feel energized. And I do have support personally at my site. And I have a community that I have encountered, and it's mostly because of them that I feel responsible to continue and not leave them hanging. I have met with many families from the Mission District that are frustrated, desesperados. That, I don't know how you translate that. Desperate doesn't come close to it. They're like urgently wanting to, they're like really frustrated, upset, they're done with, they just want to go back. They don't know how else to make those demands. And they've been in the media, they've been talking to even some organizations that I won't mention here, and they've been sort of dismissed because they feel as if they're the minority. And I realize that when we talk to other families in the Mission District, they're not everyone is not everyone is as actively engaged, but they do have a sense and they do know they want to return. They may not always have the spirit of this current group that I'm working with, of these mothers who are mostly single families, single parent family homes, and socioeconomically struggling. So my only challenge is trying to energize the families that are not as vocal with the families that are. So I do have a group that I'm working with, and I've been sharing that with you, Andy. I also sort of shared it with you, AJ, that time that we met. What I find that it's isolating is finding support from school staff, from educators. I'm not having issues finding families. As a matter of fact, I found one recently, Andy, Mission High School. I'll connect you with. You know, I'm looking for your school too, AJ. But what's challenging is the educators. They're the ones who are putting so many barriers from not giving access to or putting out information from families or staff that won't even, the way that I was in a parent-teacher conference, and I don't know if I want to leave this, but I was in my nephew's parent-teacher conference, and the conference was about reopening schools, but the teachers talking about everything about how this isn't correct. Everything about, and I'm wondering if you're talking to me and my brother and my nephew's mother, I mean, if you're talking to us as a family like this, we are conscious and we know where we stand. How are you then, with the influence that you have, how are you really able to assess if families want to go back or not if you're influencing them with your point of view? There's so much that teachers are influencing other families. It's just challenging also to have educators understand that we have to keep neutral about the subject and have families decide for themselves what they want to do. So I do feel, yeah, go ahead, AJ. And I don't even know what I'm doing right now. We said we're ranting. I'm just going through what I present to, and we could talk about something else too, but you can ask me a question.
Well,
AJ.
my question is, given that the school that you're closest to is on one of these lists of waves to return, have
second wave?
What do you anticipate, or what's been the conversation about? I mean, are people feeling like we're done? You know, we're done here, or what do you
mean by we're done here?
Because they're going to be, they're returning. They're scheduled to return. They're going to be able to go back if they want to go back. I mean, that's the story now, right? If they're pre-K to 2, they'll get the first opportunity to come back, and then 3rd through 5th, the storyline right now is like, at that school, if you want to come back and you're in the 5th grade, by April 26th, April 29th, you'll be able to do that. So I'm wondering,
they're reluctant, AJ. They're reluctant to return. The teachers are reluctant to return.
Oh, I know the teachers are.
The families.
Yeah, the families that you're speaking.
I see.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They want to return full time. They feel the schedule isn't sufficient enough for them. They feel the schedule is almost putting them making decisions about whether they should go back or not, because it doesn't make sense for their kids to have such a short amount of time at school when they've already got something going for them. Some families do need that, and they're just going to place their kids no matter what. But other families have already said, how long have we been here now? 8 months, and people have already set in place what works for them, for families that are working, for families that need to balance their kids' life or whatever. So going into something that's only going to last for a month or 2 months isn't something that they're looking forward to. This is what my families are telling me. Yeah. Does that respond? Yeah. So, but then there are those families that saying anything right now, whatever, we'll just take it. I know 3 families in particular, they're desperately just wanting anything at this point. You know, yeah.
So I have a question more about, maybe some of the details in the tentative agreement. A couple of weeks ago, we talked to Michael Kane from New York, and I was surprised to learn more of the details because the narrative is that New York schools were open, right? But it turns out that not even close to 50% of the students were actually in schools. So you, AJ, and Andrew, you both were saying that, or implying that this is not an actual reopening. What are some of the things that concern you, or the details maybe?
My understanding of what the process is going to be, a process which has not been like transparently laid out, is that there are 3 groups of schools. Your families are going to be asked, do you want to come back? Based on who says that they're going to come back in person, it will then be calculated based on the number of students that want to come back and the square footage available in that classroom, whether or not all those students can come back, or whether or not some will need to, or whether or not they'll need to do a hybrid thing. So if everybody at the class wants to come back, then they can't all come back on the same day. So some can come on Monday and Tuesday, and some can come on Thursday and Friday. If half want to come back, then, maybe they can come for the whole week. Everybody's not going to want to come back. So then that teacher is going to be not only teaching the in-person students, but also still doing their regular thing that they've been doing this entire year, delivering a separate day or set of hours of instruction to students in distance learning. And they'll get 15 whole minutes every day to prepare for that. 15 minutes to get that going. That's going to be done. And this is still, I know the more getting cleared every day, but there are dozens of schools on that list saying our intention is to have these schools open by April 29th, but it's, we have to get the classrooms set up. The classrooms aren't set up. We have to get them, checked off by DPH and Department of Public Health, clears these rooms, then we can use them. So it's still, there's so many contingencies right now. And, at the beginning of last week, they were still dangling like maybe some middle and high schools. And then by the end of the week, it was, okay, we're finally going to say no middle and high school. So they've got the teachers and the paras on the hook, they've got us on the hook to come back and work under their conditions, but they're actually not guaranteeing anything as far as from the family side or what students can really expect, I feel like. I'll start there.
Ask maybe a follow-up question. Do you happen to know how they're making these decisions? Who, so this is a tentative agreement. So who's negotiating and how are they basing these decisions? Whether to have high school students come back or not, versus younger students.
The union would tell you that none of that is up to them, that the district gets to decide all of that on their own, and that the union is, their messaging has been, we're negotiating over the impacts of the district's decisions, but, when they say that they're going to bring back middle and high school, then we'll talk to them about those conditions, but they haven't said they're doing that yet. So we're not even talking about that. And the union is not, nothing in the tentative agreement is about the process of students coming back or which classrooms are open or when or anything like that. The schedule of the day even is not part of the tentative agreement. That is all the things that the district is deciding, and our union is saying, we can only sort of mitigate impact. We can't do anything about it.
Doesn't sound like much of an agreement. Yeah.
The areas of agreement are around some of the health and safety stuff, about keeping 6 feet of distance, about plexiglass shielding for students who are at tables, and agreements that people will not get any, that they will be kept 6 foot distance from each other when inside the school, and they will get no closer than 4. The agreement is about providing some level of PPE. And so, one of the things that was really depressing for me about this is you think of school with scissors and rulers and pencils, and now it's gloves and masks and visors, and hand sanitizer stuff. I mean, it's so, and then of course there's agreement around a very vigorous contact tracing if needed if in the red tier, where every 2 weeks everyone will be tested, and I believe it's going to be mandatory, although they do not know yet. There are 14 different companies vying for the contract for this, and they don't know who that company is yet. Everyone will not. No one will be allowed in the school until you do kind of a health check. It's not. I don't think it's on a. It's not like LA at this point where it's on a. It's where there's a where the code or a passport. But they are gonna. Looks like they're gonna have monitors to. You monitor yourself and say if you have a cough, but I imagine we're talking about temperature checks and things like that. But they didn't say that yet. But so they did say anybody with COVID-like symptoms will not be allowed in a building. If they find that person will be either sent home or taken to a place inside and isolated. And so maybe that is just even walking myself through that. I mean, school is going to be about fear. And that is where the district and the union and our members are united, is that school is going to be, they say it's about safety, but for me, it feels like it's about fear. Like I remember seeing one thing, and this was an instruction for one of the students in the special education program, is how do we keep students from sharing? How do we keep students from contacting each other? And so the experiences, if it goes the way we're told, and we're going to be giving a training on how to do this, our job is to take what we used to call a school community, and look, it's capitalist education. There were limits to how far that could be. But our job now is to make every student individually feel safe by keeping other people, other teachers, other students away from them. And we're supposed to create an environment in which that is what the abiding concern, where everything that drives really everything within the school. And that to me, I think, was one of the things that was so chilling and so depressing about the fact that that narrative is accepted by everyone, as far as I can tell. The narrative, I mean, again, I don't know what's around the parents, but the narrative around, safety and 6 feet of distance and essentially a school experience that is going to be even more alienating, but it will be training people in the world of the new normal. Keep yourself safe, keep yourself separate, don't touch each other's stuff, and get your own items on your own computer, on your own phone, or on whatever. So that's one thing that comes to mind. And I think the other thing is that I still believe that this hybrid model, which that many people see as a slowly transition to full in person, is not that, particularly in light of how school is going to be such even more a soul killing and fearful experience and alienating experience. No one's going to want to stay in this environment, or no one who wants a healthy environment for their kid is going to want to stay here. So it's just going to be there for the people who have no choice, literally no choice, like homeless children or students who English language learners who have come across the border and have nowhere else to go. Essentially, that's how it feels. Like these schools are not going to be for people who actually want to learn how to deal with each other, to the extent that school and even the world will be that way. I don't know. That's one of the things that's confusing, is I feel like the school that we're coming into is exactly the kind of school you would build if you wanted a world of separate individuals alienated from each other and kept separate. One last thing. The Sacramento passed an amendment to let me take a look at what it was called. Hold on, I should get its name. Article 8, commencing with Section 320. I don't know what to say with this. It's an education bill, but basically saying that until the end of the school year 2023, in-person instruction may include hybrid models offering fewer than 5 days per week of in-person instruction. And so I very much feel that the reason I would vote no for this is that it accepts the hybrid notion. It's not all of us coming back. and it accepts the hybrid notion of education, which I think is a gateway towards fully online education, not a gateway towards full in-person learning.
It's interesting too, because here I'm looking at SFUSD, the site, and it's saying of the 80% of families, phase 2A families we've heard regarding in-person, and 57% have said they prefer to send their child to in-person, and 43% have said they prefer to stay in distance. And this is the district using the information to plan with its site leaders. And families offered, families and staff report a preference for full days for in-person learning, and families report a preference for a full week schedules for in-person. But we're not doing that, even though this is on the SFUSD results of their site. And the other thing too, I really have a hard time with is I was talking to my nephew's teacher, and they said that the children are going to be on a laptop for in-person instruction. It wasn't the point of being in person to be away from the laptop? I thought, that was the purpose of going back. Otherwise, what is the purpose of going back to school if you're going to still be on the screen? And so we said, well, we want an alternative. And the teacher said, well, I don't know if that's possible. I said, well, we're going to have to make it possible, because that's not what we're going to do. That's not what we're going to do. We didn't sign up for that. That's not what we consider in-person instruction. And I already told the vice principal too that I just told her, we're not trying to be difficult, but this is before the pandemic happened. We've said this in his preschool. We are of the families that do not want tech to be used for our child. We just don't want it. We don't want tablets, any sort of screens and plays, all that. We want it to just be as normal, as rudimentary, as kindergarten, and as any student should really have their instruction be like. Reading from printed books, not from ebooks all the time. Reading and manipulatives and all this ways of learning with your senses. Anyhow, so maybe if you two want to comment to that, what was the purpose of going in person if you're going to be on the screen?
I want to say two things. I mean, the first thing is, I think that the purpose is, it is unsustainable for the entire working class to have all of its kids at home while, parents are trying to manage. So this is like the inevitable, I think, next step to figure out like how I do believe that how public education is going to be done is being actively transformed right now. And the next step in the experiment is we see that these hubs have worked really well, whatever that means for students. So we're going to get, the pressures on families have reached a point that is in some ways is becoming a breaking point for some families. We can bring students back into classrooms to do the exact same thing that they were doing, which will require less staff, which will require fewer classrooms, because you can create these alternate schedules or whatever. And I think that's exactly what's happening. It's exactly what they're promising right now for high school level, is that high school is not going to start with a return to your classroom and your teacher, but high school is going to start with a return of bringing students into a classroom to be supervised by one adult for a full day in that room while they go through their 5 classes a day, and their teachers are still at home doing distance instruction. I'm still doing the same thing I've been doing all this year, but my students now sitting in a classroom being supervised by someone so that they can be disciplined to get onto their Zoom meetings, so they can be disciplined to log in and show up. And, that can eventually reduce the number of teachers that are needed. And you don't need a teacher doing that job, because that's not instruction, that's monitoring that's happening. But the second thing I'll say, which is by no means a glimmer of hope for me, but I will say that while I agree with what you're describing, Andy, in terms of like the severity of what's in front of us, I also do believe that, and this is why why it has been so important to me to say that everybody needs to get back to work. Like, I do believe that when teachers and students start being in those common spaces together, that yes, the plexiglass is there, and yes, we're told we have to be this far away, but there's going to be chafing. Like, that's going to create, there's going to be conversations like Eduardo's describing. There's going to be friction. There's going to be families saying, why is my child sitting on the computer again all day? This is not what I thought return to school was. So I don't feel hopeful about that, but I think that there is at least movement and possibility in that, rather than this sort of dead, stagnant situation we've been in for a year.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. And I'm thinking, so many of the best things that I do, like when we do electrical circuit labs, or when we do a light activity that we do in the auditorium that students have to work in pairs, sometimes trios, but mostly pairs. All those things are trying to be factored out of the educational experience, and so it's just frightening to me how much people look. The numbers for if you're 0 to 19 fatality rates, right? What's the chance of getting killed by COVID? 99.997%. If you're 20 to 49, it's 99.98%. These numbers we're talking about are small. They're flu numbers. Those are flu numbers of fatalities, and we are talking about ripping up any sort of communal experience. And teachers who know about community have been so ready to just tear that all up on the basis of, and I believe they know those numbers, but again, we're just holding on to this fear so bad. And yeah, like Eduardo said, I do think we need to go, get rid of tech and things like that. But I hear what you're saying, AJ. Like, some of this is just getting back. I just feel like the terms by which this is being done feel very deadening. And I don't see but I think it's not true. I do think once we get in together, maybe there is a possibility that there can be friction again, and we can challenge this. But we certainly can't do it from this position. I agree with that. So again, this is the episode where I think aloud. And so maybe that's the case. Maybe it's just a matter. But I will say that I fear that, first of all, so much damage has already been done to people who are going to potentially even think of coming back, that it already feels like our situation in public education is, we're already in a kind of a leftover, like, afterthought, in terms of, if you were a parent who wanted something good for your kid, I wouldn't do it. I'd homeschool before I'd go to that situation. I would definitely homeschool before I would send my kid into Mission High School under the situation that they're kind of talking about here.
You can go.
I would be interested to see, I read today that the city is going to spend money to offer 20,000 students, which is almost half of our enrollment, summer programming, way more than has ever been offered before, including older students. And it will be all in person. It will include recreation. I will be interested to see what the interest is in that, how it goes, how many families sign up for that, because I'm curious to see how much this sort of, like, the way that Andy was describing it, like this framing about come back to school, it's terrifying, but we'll do our best to keep you safe, and we'll put you in a little box and you can stay on your computer all day. That this, compared to come to summer programming, you'll get to be outside, we'll do fun stuff, and you'll be safe. It will be interesting to see how much of that, is there I can imagine a situation in where I might be much more likely to send my child to do that summer thing than this thing that the school district is telling me is what's going to happen in its buildings, in which case we're in really big trouble, because then it is very clear that it's like, anybody who has the resources to get your child out, get them out and go do something else, and we'll continue to publicly fund for families that don't have and won't scrape together every last resource to get your child out of the public schools. It's to me, it's like the thing that is so upsetting to me right now is the conversation about that this is like equity driven and we're thinking about our most, you know, needy students first, and this is, you know, our anti-racist education year in San Francisco, but every single step of the way it is like rigidly reinstituting tracking, segregation, separation of students at all levels across all grades, and it in the language of anti-racism and equity. And that is really scary to me, because it's just giving cover to all of this. That it's my coworkers are giving cover to all of this, talking about, you know, if you want to go back because you have the privilege to go back and you don't have to worry about X, Y, or Z. And you know, I think that has been one way that people have been able, the fear, the fact that our jobs were so difficult, underfunded, and very, very challenging before, and then this sort of terrible politics of like equity and anti-racism to actually cover up severely racist practices. It's a really messy stew.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking about, AJ. That, you know, I went to Mission High School, and just thinking if I was a student now, you know, obviously it's Lipson, you and Eduardo, you talked to the City College professors about, and I think the topic about African American students came up, right, and how like their self-worth outside of school was actually increased, because institutions are, you know, detrimental to their self-worth. And I just imagine now, like myself too, you know, as an immigrant student, going into that scenario where, you know, I'm being segregated, divided, told not to. I feel like I'm in jail at that point. You know, putting myself in that situation, dehumanizing you, you know, stripping me from my individual, you know, my really, yeah, my like individuality. Actually, surprisingly, you know, my ability to choose and move, you know, freedom of movement. And so I wouldn't, you know, I would actually lose interest in attending school.
Mhm.
Why would I, you know, why would I want to engage if this is so, you know, soul crushing as a student? Um, so yeah, you know, I actually think I can see why in the long run this is going to lead to more kids just disengaging, especially the most vulnerable, you know, which happen to be kids of color. You know, yeah, and then again, I think about parents. You know, I I interact with families, like asylum-seeking families, that I'm trying to figure out, you know, this system under these circumstances, and they have no choice. They have to trust the experts, which are the teachers, which are, you know, whoever's telling them what to do to connect to the internet, and they're struggling to make ends meet, so they can't even engage, you know, in the debates for the well-being of their kids. So they're really up to the whim of, you know, the experts or the people that know, and it's not that they don't have a say, is that they don't have the opportunity to have a say. So it is concerning, it's disempowering, um, you know, I in so many levels. So yes, I agree, this is not about safety, this is not about, you know, inclusion, equality, equity, whatever you want to name it. It's quite the opposite, and um, it's heartbreaking to see the desperation that especially the poor people, you know, the people that struggle the most are going through.
Yeah, I think this conversation has been helpful so far. I agree, AJ. I never thought about the the kinds of possibility of like if people get together that where something can happen that's surprising. That's also been one of the things that's been eliminated by this period. The surprises have been eliminated. Like I don't have the surprises of interactions that I had going to a cafe or walking through the street or going to the school, talking to my classmate or talking to my colleagues, talking to students. Like it's like surprises are gone, you know. So I do agree with that, and I also agree. Well, but I think what's coming clear to me is that for me, this plan of reopening is a for it feels like a plan of dismantling, and a plan for slowly just tearing the thing apart. And even I hadn't thought about the 20,000 kids. I didn't realize it was that high a number. That's literally, like you said, literally half. I suspect we're talking about community partners here that are going to be taking that up. Those are the piranhas that are going to be coming in to take this thing apart. Allison talked about this, how SF MoMA and all these different corporate sponsors of different community groups are going to come in and start to eat away, because no one's going to want to go into the school, but you can go to the MoMA instead and be educated there. And again, that's where the dashboard can start to be constructed, and then this stuff gets all blockchained, and then you've got whatever. But it's I think like this summer is going to be part of pulling kids, strengthening the very forces that are going to be used to chew up the rest of whatever the brick and mortar schools that used to exist. And again, that stuff had to go down, right? Like capitalism had to be taken down. Along with it, our capitalist public schools had to be taken down and reshaped and reformed in some way. But what to me is most troubling, what's being dismantled, that is the idea of in-person experience, in-person education, in-person existing. That's going away as a student, and I think it's going away as a worker. That means it's going away as a society for those of us who need each other to try to defend ourselves. Because that's what it means. That's why unions exist, is we need each other to defend ourselves. So this has been helpful for me to figure out why this is so troubling, because the people who will vote yes on this are helping us dismantle school. But the sentiment for voting no is not the sentiment for that's not my sentiment. Most of the sentiment for voting no is, no, this is not safe for us. Yeah, I mean, it's going to overwork some, and it's not right that some teachers are getting overworked with this hellish schedule that is like, what is it, from 7:45 to 8:15, you're teaching online. You get a 15-minute break, then you got like 2 or 3 hours of teaching in person, and then an hour or two at the end of teaching online again. It's like, what the, like, it's nuts, you know? And so that's set up to fail, and that's set up to just destroy a teacher who's being put in that position. And that sounds like what they're setting our K through 5 teachers up for. But the people who are voting no, it's largely like, it's not safe enough. We need more safety. We need more ventilation. We need to make sure we are all fully vaccinated. We need to make sure that there's enough more safety features put in place, which to me, that fear that has gotten them to think that is also a way society is being reorganized and how education is being dismantled. So that fear, the vote no because of fear is not a winner either, you know? So normally a no vote means we're not going to accept this agreement. We're going to go take action ourselves and go on a strike and do this. Here, that doesn't seem what this no vote forces are about. Although I do think they want to take an action to defend something, but at the end of the day, I think they're still going to end up helping dismantle the schools and play into the system, play into the narrative, because it's a no vote built around the construction that we need to keep ourselves safe from COVID, rather than a no vote built around fighting Silicon Valley and getting back together with our colleagues and students and parents so we can build solidarity for waging that fight with Silicon Valley and then spreading that throughout the working class and take on the whole capitalist class. So that, I'm just thinking this aloud right now, but that was another issue for me, is that I'm going to vote no, but I don't really feel like I'm with my other comrades or colleagues who are voting no.
Yeah, that's true. I think I don't know that we'll be given any numbers, but the other problem that with the partial return is that this is affecting such just a section of our membership. I'm very, I can imagine everybody in middle and high school, unless you're somebody who has been suffering through union meetings for 20 plus years, is even going to vote for the thing or pay attention to it. They've just been told they're, out for the rest of the year, unless they're in a special day class for moderate, severe special ed students. It's not going to apply to them at all. So I can imagine not a lot of people even voting for it. And we'll never, probably won't get those numbers anyway, but it'll be interesting to see. I know what you mean, like the people who are voting no, the people who I heard at the meetings this week, who were wondering what happens if we don't vote for this or if we vote it down, are all people who are just continuing to say, like, we can't go back. It's not enough. It's not safe enough. And, I don't think that there is, even though, I think the people who are thinking like we could take some action, let's do like Chicago did, I think it's a very, very small number. And I don't think there's much, coalescing around the idea of like, let's not go back and take some action. Our union's been so demobilized for so long, and we've just spent this year behind our computers, I don't think anything is really shaping up. But I'll be interested to see if there is this amount of no that happens, because not that that's a good sign for our union. It's a terrible sign for everything. It's a bad sign for what our coworkers think. It's a bad sign for our union because they're not even able to marshal people behind their terrible agreement or leadership. But I imagine, I fully expect it to be like almost everything else, where a small number of people will vote and overwhelmingly will vote for it. And we're ready to just go back. Elementary school teachers are used to really terrible working conditions. Have been for a very long time, unfortunately.
I was just going to say that I think I'm just upset that the families that I'm working with are feeling as if this, the way they say it is that they feel that teachers have abandoned them. This is the way they perceive it. They perceive it. They feel that there isn't any solidarity with families. We were talking together, and we were talking about Cesar Chavez and how at the time of the strikes that Cesar Chavez and his team, they had all made sure that the families were well taken care of, that families had the proper, if they needed food, if they needed any financial taken care of, they even had their own banking system, and they had as well as childcare and also resources for any of the families. I'm not saying it was a perfect strike, but they worked very hard in making sure that people were taken care of. And this feels as if when families are trying to advocate to go back, educators are saying, you're anti-union, anti-worker. And then the families feel, well, we are workers as well. We are struggling here. And educators say, we're not ready, it's not safe. And there's only one voice being of one kind of worker being, or a set of workers that is being heard. And that's why the families that I'm working with, which many they are saying, they're very resentful with educators right now. And that's why some of them will even go and work with decreasing the distance, because they see that there are stronger voices or they have more of the resources that they have. And at this point, they don't even care if one of those leaders happen to be pro-charter schools or whatever. So for educators to say, well, these families are being used, or these families, I think it's very important to recognize that there's some truth. There is something that is validating what they're saying when they're saying educators are leaving them behind. I don't know if you both would like to comment on that. But that is even just last Sunday, when I met up with them at the park, it just came up. There was a lot of families, and it was just me and my former coworker, and they started just throwing it at us about how much teachers are giving up on their families and how they're self-interested. This is all the stuff that they said. And I felt defensive almost, because I know a lot of my teacher friends that don't want to go back. I have a relationship with them, and I just quickly said it's complicated, and I'm in disagreement with them, and I am supportive of us going back. And one of the parents said, how could you be friends? And she looked at me and she said, how could you be friends with someone that leaves us in the trenches and working hard by ourselves, figuring these things out on our own, how could they be your friends? They're not looking out for our kids, us. We would look out for them just as much as they would look out for us if only they actually reached out. They don't reach out. They just provide the virtual social working experience of just an hour of therapy that we need. What is that going to do? Or, well, they'll throw in some GoFundMe resource money that's done within a week or whatever we need to do with it. So it's not we need to be thrown out with more money. It's not that we need to be thrown out with an hour of session of therapy. It's that we need to go back. We need to work with teachers. We need to go back. That's what we need. And so I was just listening. And so I'm sharing with you all and here as well. I don't know if anyone, if you want to make sense of that, but that is a sentiment that they truly feel.
Well, I think that they are right to feel that way, frankly. I mean, I think they're right to feel that way. And I also think that what is being set up for their children to go back to is going to be terrible. And it's going to actually take the people who work in those school buildings and in those schools to dismantle it for it to actually look any different. I think the first thing I thought of, when you were saying that is like, how quickly this idea of like social justice unionism that was been so in vogue on the left for the last decade or so, like has fallen away in San Francisco. We say we stand up, our teachers union takes a stand on all working class issues, but in this case, we've been utterly divided from each other. This is what we talked about, a month or two ago when we were discussing with each other, like the result of the lawsuit being filed against the city, and how it has been very successful to pit the unions and what the unions are saying and what the teachers are saying against families. I think it has been successful, and I get why it's been successful, because I think it's a wrong position. It's been the wrong position to say that we shouldn't all be immediately back. We should have been back when schools opened in August. We should have all been back, and that would have been, but it's not, we don't see ourselves, unfortunately, especially in teaching, we don't often imagine ourselves as being part of the working class. There's all this talk about professionalization, and this is a profession and a calling and a vocation and a mission and all of this other stuff that's not about seeing ourselves as part of a class that is the same class as the families of the students that we're teaching. And I don't see how that damage gets repaired without us getting back to school and saying, this is actually disgusting what's been set up for us to do and what's been set up for kids, and to begin to take it apart. We'd have to repair that through actually struggling for it to look different.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I would agree with that parent and those parents who say, we teachers have abandoned you. I think that has been, like, that's how I felt. I felt like we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. And the problem for me is, like, now I'm voting no, which means, in a sense, I'm voting against this, what's being called a reopening plan. So is that a second abandonment? If that parent would think that, I can kind of get that. But the thing that I wanted to go back to, the thing that I thought we needed to go back to, was something that was us as workers, as school workers, going and collaborating with other workers about how schools needed to be reopened immediately. It wouldn't allow a testing company, like a PCR tester, to come in and say, we get to decide if we're going to shove a swab up your nose just because Governor Newsom says you're going to red tier and the CDC says something. Right? That is not the conditions under which. That's not a free school for me. That's not a situation that I would say, oh, here, now we're actually doing school again, when they can just again say, we got to keep 6 foot of separation, no closer than 4 feet. We're going to scan you as you come into school. We're going to make sure we have like little badges that say where you can safely stand. We're going to make sure that when you queue in the cafeteria line, you're 6 feet away from each other. It's like, no, you know, like I felt like the only way we were going to get out of this is if all of us agreed to put all that stuff aside and say, no, we're going back so we can take our schools back. And again, I don't know how to separate it from at this point from the sentiment towards taking back all of society and making a revolution, because they're using this entire COVID narrative to structure society for the capitalists as it is. So I do understand where that parent's coming from. I actually agree with them. I've felt like we're doing the wrong thing, but I can't agree to going back on the terms that are being leveled here. Yes, they're going to destroy public education, but this is going to be another part of the attack on the collective working class as we relegate all their children into a future of the fourth industrial revolution, of all distance learning, essentially, and then all distance working, all remote working. If you have a job, because most of us it's really going to be about collecting the data of our students, collecting the data of our teachers. So all of us can be more and more easily replaced with machines, and the rest of us who do have jobs, you know, good luck with what's out there. That is what I feel like we need to fight. And going forward into this plan only moves us more towards it. Resisting it at this point, unfortunately, the people who are saying no, they're not about fighting the fourth industrial revolution. They're about safety and continuing that narrative. So frankly, that's why this is so confusing for me. Like, if we say yes, I don't like it. If we say no, I don't like it. I'm not abstaining. I'm not for what they're talking about. But the fact is that there are very, very few of us who are talking about what we think is really going on here. We could be wrong, but this is what I think. And since so few of us are talking about it, it's like, I don't even know where to start in terms of trying to begin to organize around it and talk about it in any real way. It's like a dream. It's like more of a dream than, than unicorns. It feels fantastic because the sentiment that I'm talking about that would need to exist to really fight this thing doesn't even come close to existing in this country. So I don't know what to do about that.
I will just also say that educators who are critical of the group decreasing the distance because they're having charter schools or because one of the family members that is leading or whatever is, what is the difference between that, as we were talking about on Sunday, the families and I, what is the difference between that and the public-private partnership that Google is having with public education? If we're so concerned about charter schools or whatever taking over really public education, what is the difference? It's more of a threat, I think. What UESF and SFUSD is okay having Google be a part, and all the other mega companies, I don't even know what other company there is that's involved, having our students' data, having as well, leading us into this no-touch future, right? It's really amazing how it's all right to have this public-private partnership, but it's not all right because of this other thing, because they might lead us into something else that's threatening for education, public education.
I agree.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
I mean, really, I've been asking about AJ. I've been asking fellow teacher friends. I said, "What is the issue with decreasing the distance? What's your issue with decreasing? What's your issue with decreasing?" And so I got sent an article about one of the leading parents from decreasing the distance that is a promoter of charter schools. I said, "Okay, that's it. What else? What's the dirt? What do you have on them?"
Yeah.
What do you have on them? All right, they've got lawyers or they've got some family. Okay, well, yes, all right. What makes them? I suppose I'm trying to figure out. I don't even know if they're the ones who initiate. I don't think so. It was a city who initiated the lawsuit. I don't know if it was increasing the distance who initiated the lawsuit. So again, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm like, what's the dirt that you have? And I've been sent the same article. And I thought, well, that's it. If that's it, well, isn't it a little bit hypocritical that we think it's okay? The families are saying, well, this other public partnership is happening and no one else is saying anything about that, no?
Yeah, and once we accepted this distance regime, we opened ourselves up for just being taken to pieces by pods and charters and choice and Catholic churches and private schools. So we can't, like, anybody who supports charter, we are supporting charter schools by staying in distance learning.
That's right. I don't have anything else to say. Just to say that I see I see in a certain San Francisco Facebook group.
Shall remain nameless.
I see there is all kinds of mixed messages about families not wanting to return, and yet I have finally seen the results here of families that want to return. As I had mentioned earlier, that there are 57% of families that plan to send the children back, and this is with a low rates number, right? And so that's more than half, and I wonder what the other percentages are, which I'll look into later. But it just, there's a push for certain narratives. It's just like, this is the way that it is. This is what we are seeing, and sometimes anecdotal, and sometimes statistically wrong, or wherever. And I get really bothered by that. I don't know if you both want to say anything to that, by how educators are supposed to be educated, well-read, intellectual, teachers, fact-checkers. Where are they getting this information from? Right?
No,
and I don't mean to.
I think you said it. I think you said it last week or the week before, right? On this very show, it seems like the more formal education you have, the more you're just lining up to get your QR code and be shoved into your little box and be a gig worker for the rest of your life and say it's freedom. It's happening.
It's terrible. And any dissenting voice on certain Facebook groups, immediately it's like wolves going after a bear that's an opinionated bear, but you have a bunch of wolves that are coming right on top of you in those groups. Anyhow, that's all my comment on it.
And one little factoid, this is not that, I mean, well, it's important, it's been a difficulty, is they did say when they were surveying parents, that there were schools where, like, some schools where only 13% of the parents wanted to come back, and some schools were 70%. So that was an average. And I admit that that's a challenging thing to figure out how to navigate. Personally, I would say anybody who wants their kid in school, like, gets to have them in school and put them wherever they, can put them. Like, I don't, at this point, the idea is to, like, let kids be with each other again. Let kids experience each other again, and from a parent, that's what whether that happened at Mission or Chavez or wherever, I don't know how that much would matter. And, but that's literally just me talking. And I'm trying to solve that problem through their lens. And this problem was started the minute it didn't start, but this problem got rolling the minute everyone started getting terrified and being made more terrified of each other through the COVID narrative. Kenny, do you have anything to say about this stuff you've been hearing?
Just AJ reminded me of this quote I've been wrestling with this whole week. It's by Albert Einstein, and he said, "The only thing that interferes with my learning is my education." So it just makes me think, the more institutionally educated people around me, at least, they're the most anxious about this whole thing, the most willing to line up and accept this new world taking shape. And so I am glad I'm not so formally educated, I guess. And, not everyone around me is. So, yeah, and we're not so anxious anymore.
I think it was Kenny actually who said, now that I remember, it was because I was trying to think back on which episode, EJ, I think it was Kenny who had said that, because it is a true statement. The more educated you are, there's something about blinding it is, no?
It was one of you geniuses talking about why San Francisco is so like utterly compliant with this year of lockdown nonsense.
Yeah.
Day
Well-
359 today, everybody. Just in case you're counting. My partner is, so.
I will say, as a former teacher of Kenny, I'm going to take responsibility for not formally educating him.
I don't remember chemistry.
See, look what I did.
Well done.
See that?
No, but you know what? On the serious note, like for me, you know, I did drop out of college with 1 semester to go, whatever. You know, it almost fucking killed me. And I've learned the most after college. Like because you know, I was actually learning what I wanted to learn, and you know, feeding my curiosity, and
yeah,
it's led me to this path. You know, and I'm happy. You know, and I'm actually liberated. You know, because I've taken knowledge into my own hands, and you know, just hoping that we can somehow fight for that future where, you know, people can do what they want to do, not what they have to do.
And AJ, I appreciate you joining us for this. It was actually helpful for me to just kind of like, I mean, just kind of sigh through my way through this thing a little bit, and just hear some of the things you had to say. I mean, I always enjoy hearing Eduardo and Kenny, but it was really good to have you here for this.
We always appreciate AJ. Thanks
for having me, you guys. Come think aloud with you anytime.
All right. What's Left is a weekly political podcast as channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast channel there and connect with us. I remind folks that if you like anything you have heard here, please share your favorite episode, turn on your notifications, rate, review, subscribe to our platforms on podcasts. We have on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and on channels on Bitchute, LBRY or LBRY, LBRY, and Odysee spelled Odyssee, or YouTube. And if you'd like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts Andy Lipson and Kenny Cepeda. Thank you, AJ, for having joined us, and see you all next time.